Well, thank you for coming. I understand that some of you have come from as far away as the fourth floor. The program today will be about astronomy and observatories, large and small. When the Victoria telescope was built, it was the largest telescope in the world. It had a mirror diameter of 72 inches or 6 feet, and it weighed 2 tons. When completed, it was hauled up on Little Sandwich Mountain by a horse and wagon. The Victoria telescope only held this title for 3 months. The Mount Wilson telescope in California, which was built in 1917, nudged our Victoria telescope out of first place with a 100-inch mirror. 18 years later, the David Dunlop Observatory in Richmond Hill, just outside of Toronto, built an observatory with a 74-inch mirror, putting us in third place. John Plaskett was the original engineer, astronomer, who was responsible for having the telescope built in Victoria. In 1975, my wife and I were shopping for a house in Victoria, and we nearly bought a place in Esquimalt that was on the water on a nice little cliff with a beautiful view of the harbor. The name of the street was Plaskett Place. Tomorrow, the Berwick bus will be taking you to the observatory for a tour of the universe.
Stargazers across Canada are turning their telescopes toward Victoria. An amateur astrophotographer has just accomplished what some professional astronomers have been trying to do for years. Wayne Williams explains.
Jack Newton got his first telescope for Christmas when he was 12. 31 years later, he's still going at it. He's got his own backyard observatory just outside Victoria.
Everything is homemade. Leo Vanderbilt ground and polished the optics for me, and whose property I'm on right now. The telescope is all homemade, basement variety, scrap metal.
Everything in here is homemade. His telescope with 20-inch mirror took him 6 months to build. He even built his own camera, called a cold camera, designed to make the film very sensitive to light.
This doesn't sound like a hobby for everyone.
Well, again, it depends. You can go out and stick your camera on a tripod and take pictures of stars and planets and aurora and so on. It's just, this is sort of the advanced end of astrophotography.
And now, after a year of trying, a photograph of Halley's Comet. The small dot of light the pen is pointing to is the comet.
It's very, very faint. It's only about just a few kilometers across, and it's over 500 million kilometers away.
What did you think when you first discovered that? Yes, you caught it. You caught it on
well,
film.
It was more of a relief than anything because I'd been trying so hard to get it.
If Jack Newton could do it, the big guns tried to take a crack at it too. At the Astrophysical Observatory near Victoria, the telescope with a mirror over 3 times the diameter tried to pick up Halley's last night, but no success.
We thought if anyone could do it, Jack Newton would.
Seems Jack Newton's equipment is better designed for photography. He's taken enough pictures to fill his 3rd book, and is one of the best known and respected amateur astrophotographers in the country.
When did you ever become a professional?
Well, being an amateur, I've got the advantage of doing exactly what I want. I work on my projects on my time, and it's exciting. And if you're really good at what you're doing, then it's a lot more fun being an amateur.
Wayne Williams, CBC News, Victoria.
And this is the house that Jack built on Matheson Mountain. It's not really a house, it's an observatory. On the other hand, professional astronomers have a much harder row to hoe. The telescopes they use are usually owned by the universities, and in order to get telescope time to do their research, they have to submit a thesis with an outline of their project, telescope time required, and the basis of their project. This is subject to a lot of scrutiny and approval by the university. It's a much different vocation. Some of you may have seen this movie before. I made it as a memoir for my grandkids, and I showed it at the Berwick a couple of years ago. I think I've always had an interest in astronomy. I wanted to know more about it, so in the late 1980s I bought a book about astronomy by Terence Dickinson. From there, I found out that amateur astronomers meet at the McLaughlin Planetarium near the museum on Avenue Road and Bloor Street, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. This is where I met Walter McDonald, who became a lifetime friend. I still communicate with him today. Walter's dad had a farm at Thomasburg, Ontario, and we started to go there most weekends because the skies were dark. It was 100 miles or so away from Toronto, but we had a warm place to stay at his dad's farmhouse if the skies clouded over. Walter had an observatory there that he built years before, and we ended up building more observatory buildings on the back property. We first started putting posts into the ground. They were really heavy girder steel, and we sunk them down about 7 foot in concrete. They had to be absolutely solid to be a telescope mount. Then we built buildings around the posts until we had 4 observatories on the back property. We first met Jack Newton at Queen's University. After the meeting, we offered to drive Jack to his next meeting, which was in London, Ontario. Jack Newton is the most well-known amateur astronomer, not only in Canada, but in North America. So we drove from Kingston to Thomasburg to show Jack our astronomy complex. On several occasions, we went down to Chiefland, Florida, in the Panhandle, where he had a winter home and a roll-off roof observatory dedicated to taking pictures of the southern skies. He ran it as a bed and breakfast and invited serious astrophotographers to use his equipment. In 1996, when the McLaughlin Planetarium was still functioning, a trip to the Star Hill Inn in Cloudcroft, New Mexico was organized. It was a special observatory location in the mountains that featured dark, clear skies. We stayed for a week and took a lot of pictures of the southern galaxies and nebula. This trip was so successful that we went back again in 1998 with better equipment and better preparation. It was here where I got serious about remotely controlling a telescope. I would run wires from my computer to the telescope so I could operate it from a warm trailer. My work with making telescopes remote controlled attracted attention of people who wanted to do the same. One chap in particular is very electronically talented, later formed a company to sell remote telescopes. Every summer we would attend Starfest in Mount Forest, Ontario. It was a great big trailer park where they catered to astronomers. It was a week-long event with stargazing and photography during the night and lectures and demonstrations and swap tables during the day. In the winter we would do the same thing at the Winter Star Party near Marathon in the Florida Keys. In 1986 I went to Australia with a small telescope to take astrophotos of Comet Halley. It only comes around every 76 years. I went with a tour group, but I was the only astronomer. As much as it was in the outback, in the middle of Australia, there was a luxurious hotel with marble floors and all of the amenities. It was a tourist destination for Ayers Rock, which is nearby. Our group was taken by bus about 30 miles away from the hotel to get away from the hotel lights. In fact, there was so little light that without a moon you could see your shadow on the ground just from the starlight. This one night at midnight, everybody of our group wanted to go back to the comfort of the hotel, but I didn't come all this way under beautiful skies to be in a hotel room. The bus driver asked me if I really wanted to stay there all alone all night. I told him yes, and he said he would come back for me at 6 o'clock in the morning. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, it clouded over, so I thought I would lay down in the sand and have a nap. It's a good thing I didn't. I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I listened, and the rustling seemed to be all around me. I don't know why, but I thought it might be wise to stand up tall. I remember seeing a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy, where a little boy put a board on top of his head so that he looked as tall as he could.
He remembered his father had said, if you're taller than the hyena, it'll keep its distance. It couldn't understand how this small creature had grown tall so suddenly.
Sure enough, when the driver picked me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I told him about this, and he said, well, they must have been dingoes, which was a pack of wild dogs. Nice to know. Being a glutton for punishment, in 1987, the very next year, I went to Australia again to witness and photograph the supernova SN 1987A, which was going to be visible to the naked eye. This time I went with an astronomy group of fellow astrophotographers, and we stopped off at Hawaii on our way, and we stayed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel in Honolulu. We saw all the sights and climbed the famous Diamond Head Mountain overlooking the beach at Waikiki. It's a tough life. We spent some time in Sydney as tourists. It was a very nice trip, and no dingoes. One of my magic moments in astronomy was when I got a call from Terry Dickinson, the author of the book that I first read about astronomy, and became interested in the hobby. He called to ask me what kind of film did I use to take my astro photos in Australia. It was one of those magic moments where the student becomes the teacher. That was special. Some of my astro images have been published in a number of astronomy magazines, such as Sky and Telescope, Astronomy Magazine, Sky News, and CCD Astronomy Magazine. I also had a full article about my portable observatory published in Sky and Tel. These were our observatories in Thomasburg, Ontario, which is about 80 miles north of Belleville. Thomasburg is not famous, but there's a little town nearby that is famous for being the first gold found in Ontario. Its name is, you guessed it, El Dorado. A motley crew, to be sure. My observatory started off as a roll-off roof, and then I changed it to a more convenient dome. When setting up away from your observatory at a trailer park or star party, you need to have a home away from home and away from the elements. The claptrap is a self-standing, self-supporting mobile structure that you can take anywhere. The whole building is made out of 4 sheets of plywood, even the roof with a window. How sweet it is. It fits into the trunk of a regular-sized car. Adding an extra panel, you could house 2 people and a telescope. But eventually I had to sell my car to get a bigger trunk. I think at this point a demonstration is necessary. This can get technical, but I wanted to illustrate how different and difficult astrophotography is as compared to regular astronomy and photography. Binoculars are a great choice when learning about astronomy. The 150 power drugstore telescope is almost useless. It's just got too much magnification. Deep sky astrophotography is done with the 20 power Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope that's shown here. Even the largest telescopes in the world all use about 20 power. It's all about gathering light and not about magnification. As soon as night falls, dew forms. For this you need a dew shield and a heater. The mirror is the main part of the camera. Motors are required to keep up with the motion of the sky. Without them, you get star trails like this. The CCD camera is what takes the pictures. The heat sink is what keeps the camera below zero. If you want a color picture, you have to use color filters. The guide telescope keeps everything on target. Last but not least, this is the only element that you could see through. The hardest, but most rewarding part of the hobby is finding the object. Charles Messier was a comet hunter. Being the first to find a comet, it's very prestigious and you get to put your name on it. Comets first appear as a fuzzy little object that have to be photographed for a while to determine whether or not they are actually a comet. He kept on running into other faint objects that turned out not to be comets, and he wanted to discard them as useless. These objects turned out to be the most beautiful nebula and galaxies when they were fully photographed. So he created a catalog of these useless objects. This is the most popular and useful catalog in use today. The mirror is the main element in the telescopes we used. It's almost impossible to keep a fix on a fuzzy object that's far, far away. Finding a suitable guide star is essential to get a good image. Many images have to be stacked together, sometimes hundreds, even thousands, to capture enough light. From just a blur to become spectacular. In my day, when we were taking pictures, they were always black and white. You didn't get a color picture unless you used filters, which adds another 7 hours to your project. For comparison, here are some of the images I made in the 1980s and 90s. Forgive the quality, the camera I used was 30,000 pixels. The cameras of today are 30 million pixels, a factor of 1,000 times better. The peak years for doing this hobby was from 1984 to 1999. My hobby attention span seems to be about 15 years. Before moving to Lagoon City in 2002, I sold all my astronomy equipment. It was no longer feasible to join my friends and go to the McDonald Farm in Thomasburg from my new location on Lake Simcoe. Fun fact, in 1945, our radios had 6 tubes, equivalent to 6 transistors. The average iPhone today has 8 billion transistors. Not million, billion. Comparing the telescope I used some 30 years ago, it's like comparing a horse and buggy to a Tesla. But we had to be there to get here. The modern amateur telescopes of today are very advanced, using very sophisticated software designed to correct for all of the deficiencies we had when we were doing astrophotography years ago. They're only 2.5 foot high. They're not affected by the wind. They don't require an observatory building. Just set it on level ground, come into the house, and everything is remote controlled. You just tell the camera how many pictures you want to take. It will stack them, keep the good images, and discard the ones that are not perfectly aligned. It even contains 3 catalogs, so you can dial up any image that you want. It couldn't be easier. Here are 2 apps that you can download into your iPad, computer, or digital notebook that will allow you to browse the night sky, locate constellations, planets, galaxies, and zoom in and get a full-size picture equal to those taken with big telescopes. It becomes your own personal planetarium, and these apps are free. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for coming.